And I'm Dr. Zhu Qianqiu from the Institute of Earth Science of Academia Sinica. Today, we are going to discuss about the past climate change and the related research on and around Taiwan. Just introduce you Taiwan very briefly. Here is a global map divided by several time zones. There are 24 time zones on Earth, and there is 1 hour difference between each time zone. And in this map, although it's written in Mandarin, this is San Francisco, this is London, and we are here in Taiwan. And you can see some cartoons here to show different human activities at different locations on Earth. For example, when residents in London is having their lunch, we in Taiwan are probably watching evening TVs in your sofa. And for those who live in San Francisco, they are probably asleep because it's 4 o'clock in the morning. And for New Yorkers, it's their rush hour. Everyone is probably in a hurry to get to work. So we know that everything happens at different times on Earth. And for us here in Taiwan, usually it's about 12 hours difference between the America and Taiwan. Let's just give you an idea that when we talk about the time, and even the date is somewhat different. Usually, Sunday evening in Taiwan is Sunday morning in the United States. So this just give you an idea. And then, in terms of the current climate, this is a map for Asia. This is Himalayas, and Taiwan is here. Taiwan has a very special positions here in terms of tectonic and climate. But today we'll just talk about the climate first, because we are located in the eastern side of the Asian monsoon system. In winter, we are severely influenced by the winter monsoon, usually blowing from northeast to Taiwan. And in summer, especially our rainfall and precipitations are significantly affected by summer monsoon, which blows from southwest from here to Taiwan. And during June, July, August, even September, we have a couple of typhoons coming from the tropical oceans. And I think most of you might have arrived in this summer. There was a really severe one in August. A devastating typhoons caused lots of casualties and loss in Taiwan. And also my foot was hurt during one of the heavy rains at the time. So this is what affects Taiwan mostly. And why we talk about this is because in paleoclimate, usually we think North Atlantic Ocean is the most important controlling factors in terms of global climate change. However, recently, some researchers think the Asian monsoon systems also plays a very important role, at least modulating some sort of global climate response, or I should say interact with the North Atlantic Ocean, or interact with air temperature on top of the Greenland. So many scientists really wanted to know how these systems varies in the past. And look at our locations here, Taiwan. Since we oftentimes hit by typhoons and significantly affected by winter monsoons and summer monsoons, around Taiwan we have the potential to provide several materials for scientists to study the paleoclimate, because those climate signals might have been recorded in those archives, and if we try our best to measure the signals in the past, then we might be able to reconstruct a history of past climate change. And that's why in this class, later in the lecture, I'll introduce you what kind of research have been done around Taiwan. And then let's look at the Taiwan island again. This is more like a topography map for Taiwan. You can see there are lots of high mountains in the middle, a little bit towards the east, and we have flat lands in the west. And this topography greatly affect our short-term weather or long-term climate. We can tell it from the annual rainfalls. Here is a chart. This chart shows the annual rainfall from, I think it's from January to December in the north. And this is the precipitation chart from January to December for the south. And of course, when the bar is higher, it means we get higher precipitation. From this map, it tells us that in general, there are more precipitation in the north than in the south, and more precipitation in the east compared to west. And if you look at these two maps closely, the contours looks pretty similar to the topographies. It means the topography really affects the local climate here. And why is that? Because of the elevations. When there are high mountains here, the elevation is much higher, so sometimes it can block the moisture from the open oceans and let the precipitations drop down there. And that's why, particularly for islands with high mountains, the climate can be largely controlled by the elevations. Here are two maps. They are isosome maps, which means we connect places with the same temperatures and make a contour of that. And this is the isosome map for winter, and this is isosome map for July. And if you remember the map from the previous slide, the mountainous map of Taiwan, you can sense immediately that no matter in winter or in summer, it looks like our temperature distribution is also controlled by the elevations. And of course, you can see that in this chart, the orange means hotter temperature, and in this chart, the green one means colder temperature. So it's cold in the mountains, and it's really hot in the north, in the south, and in the western flatlands. So let's look at the ocean currents right now. And sorry about this figure because they are all in Mandarins. But anyway, this is mainland China, and this is Taiwan. And we have a very important ocean currents which called crucials right next to Taiwan. It affects our fisheries and our weather significantly. And we also have some ocean currents coming from South China Sea going like this way. And sometimes we also have the China coastal currents coming from north like this. And why are we talking about this? Because we have different ocean and circulation distributions between summer and winters. Because in summers, remember that we talk about monsoons. The summer monsoons coming from this way, so it produced a branch from the crucials and to join the South China Sea flows. Then everything flows to the north. But in winter, we have northeastern winter monsoons coming from this way, so it detours the branch of the crucial a little bit. Thus, the ocean currents originally would flow to the north, but then it joined with the coastal currents and then coming back to the south. That's why in winter seasons, the weather is really bad and terrible in these region because of those disturbance, ocean currents, and which conflict in this area. And in Taiwan, there are many scientists from geoscience field. They are trying to retrieve some core materials or even coral materials in the South China Sea to help us to monitor the changes between summer and winter conditions. And then let's look at climate in the global view. In this chart, it shows the mean global temperature for the past several hundred years. And this is done by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. So let's look at the chart into details. First, let's look at the x-axis. It represents the calendar years. So this is year 2000, and now it's here. That's year 1860. So this is from past to now. And for the y-axis, it means temperature on the right-hand side. And conventionally, we calculate the average temperature between 1960s to 1990s as we take it as standards. Then we calculate current temperatures, the difference between current temperatures and the mean standards. Then it turns into the scales on the left-hand side, just to show you if it is colder than that average or is hotter than average. Those black dots are the real data, the real mean annual temperatures, and the blue lines are the confidence intervals of these data. So we can look at this data in many different ways. If we only look at the past 1 and 50 years, which is the red line, you can see a gradual increasing trend of temperature, which is about 0.045 degrees Celsius per decade. And if you look at the past 100 years, which is the purple trend, it looks like the temperature increased a little bit faster, right? And if you look at the past 50 years, which is the orange line, the temperature increased even faster. And if you only consider the data from the past 25 years, which is the yellow line, it increased dramatically, terribly. So it means the global temperature is not only increasing, it increased in a much, much faster way, right? So it's like an exponential increase. It means in the following 5 or 10 years, the temperature may increase much, much faster than maybe 0.5 or even 1 degree Celsius per decade. And for those who are not that familiar with temperature, maybe you think, oh, that's nothing, 1 or 2 degrees, that's no problem. But in fact, half degrees of the temperature might melt some of the ice in the polar regions. Then when the ice melts, the sea level will rise. Then it means the lowlands in Holland or even in Taiwan or in New York may be under the sea. So it shrinks the areas for human beings to reside. That's a significant problem. That's why there is an international study groups to monitor this change closely. But in fact, in the past, the Earth already have warm period and cold periods periodically. So how do we know how well we can predict the future? First, we need to know the past. We need to know the cyclic patterns in the past first and put that into a good model. Then you can predict the future. However, even now, we are not so well understand the changes in the past, which are those black dots. That's why currently, at least in geoscience, people try to use many different materials. At least in the first step, we want to know the past pattern of climate change. So when we talk about climate, we can study modern, past, and paleo. When we say modern, probably it's about like last 10 years or last 50 years. And when we say past, maybe past several centuries, which we have historic literatures to look at. And when we call anything paleo, it means it's something really, really old in the past that no written records to be referred. For the modern climate, it's actually easy as long as we have satellites and some instruments. You can measure the temperature change or precipitation or cloudiness or the moisture contents in the atmospheres. And for the past climate, we probably can look at past instrumental records or some historic literatures, no matter from Greek or from mainland China. But for paleoclimate, it's extremely hard to reconstruct. So we need to use certain proxies, several proxies, to represent temperature in the past or represent salinity in the past in order to calculate paleotemperature, or we can just say some parameters in paleoclimate. And now let me introduce you what kind of material we can use to study paleoclimate. We usually use natural archive. Later I will have several set of slides to explain the details of them. But basically we can have 6 very useful natural archives. The first one, you probably cannot tell what it is. Actually, it's a photo for the ocean sea bottom. So here are sediments, and this is the anchoring position to tell you where you should drill. So if we can collect the sediments in the deep seas and analyze the sediments, we probably can know some of the paleoclimate. And the second one is more obvious. It looks like ice, right? And this is a scientist is trying to collect the ice because if we can analyze the chemical signatures in the ice, usually it can extend up to 100,000 years old. Then we can probably know the climate signature at that time. And these photos, you might feel strange because it looks like a vacation spot. And yes, it is. You see some, yes, coral reef, lots of coral reefs, because corals only grows at certain regions, at certain temperature range, and some of them only grows at certain depths. So if you study them, you probably can reconstruct the past sea level variation. And if you analyze the skeletons of the corals, you can reconstruct paleotemperature as well. And then the fourth photo, it looks like milk or some ice bars. Actually, that's a cave deposit. They are carbonates. Usually those caves are underground, and you have to kind of dig in and to collect those various kind of carbonates to measure them, because those carbonate are precipitated from groundwater or drip water. It grows really, really slow, but sometimes it gives you layers. Then you analyze the chemical signatures of each layers. You can reconstruct the paleo environment. Then the fifth figures, this looks obvious, right? It's an oak tree. So later I'll talk about how we use trees to know the past climate. And then the sixth one, this is glaciers in the mountains. And if you notice, usually there is a borderline here. And let's imagine if the weather was colder, of course the glaciers grows bigger, right? So this borderline would go down a little bit. And usually there's certain features around this borderline. So by examining the elevation of the paleo borderlines, you can kind of calculate the paleo temperatures. And now let me go into the details of each archive. First, before that, when I talk about these 6 figures, we are talking about how to measure the chemical signatures in them. But actually, when we study paleoclimate, the most important thing is chronology. If you don't know the age of your sample, there's no way you can reconstruct paleo environments. Let me give you 4 examples. The first one, A, is the ice cap. In polar regions, when the ice accumulates largely, usually they have layers, and you can count it by your eyes or count it by machine. Usually this is annual, and of course the old layer is in the bottom, and the younger snow and younger layers deposited on top. And the second example is the deep sea sediments. And usually it has certain layers as well, also in lake sediments. And these layers, it may be annual, may not be annual, but anyway, you can count them, and the old parts should be in the bottom, the younger parts should be on top. And in the trees, how do we know the age of that? And of course, the old trees is usually in the middle, and the younger layers grows in the outer part. So what we do with the tree is we drill a little hole through the trunk and take it out to count the layers. And then the fourth example is in live coral parietes. When we collect the coral samples, we need to know the age. And of course, the outer part should be current age because it's a live corals. And the skeletons deeper inside is older. And this is just a general concept of how we know the age. But actually, we also have some other methods to obtain the age information, especially for carbonate, because we can use uraniums or carbon-14 to radioactive date them. And that kind of age, we cannot date it so details like each years, but every samples we know the age exactly because it's radioactive dates. It's not counting. But today we are not going to the details of that, but I'm just telling you there is a very sophisticated method to establish the chronologies in those archives. Otherwise, your data are useless. So now let's look at those archives. What kind of climate time range can we study? Each archive has its own advantages and disadvantages, and there's no way to go around that. Sometimes the topics or the time range we can discuss depends on what kind of material we get. For example, if we have historical books or tree rings, it can tell us the climate records for maybe past several thousand years. And if you have lake sediments, it probably can give you the idea for the past 10,000 years. And anything below that, the sediment gets too compact. There's no way for you to determine the age of that. And if you somehow can estimate the water level in the lake or the marginal elevation of mountain glaciers, then it tells us the climate somewhere between 10 to 100,000 years before present. So actually, in terms of long-term climate change, the best material would be from ice cores and deep sea sediments, because it is usually continuous, so you can count back for many layers, and it is usually very long, so we can study climate change for about even several 100,000 years before present. So for the majority conclusions in the paleoceanography or paleoclimatology, most materials are from ice cores and ocean sediments, which is tree rings. This is a cross-section of a fir trunk, and it's obvious there are rings here. So if you count the rings, you can know the age of the trees. Although there are some individual difference due to malnutrition or some forest fire event. However, if you can collect several trees, I should say at least 10 or 12 trees at one spot, you can kind of average out the individual difference and know the general trend in that locations. And actually, this kind of studies was first developed in North America and in Europe, because trees in colder areas has more clear ring features. It's easier to count. For hotter regions like tropical areas, usually the tree grows so fast, the ring becomes really blurry. It's difficult to count. So the best tree ring study is actually from Europe and North America. But why are we talking about it right now? Because in Taiwan we have high mountains. It's actually really cold in high mountains. So we actually have some cypress, cedars, that kind of trees has clear rings. Because in the high mountains in Taiwan, the climate is almost comparable to temperate areas. So this could be a potential material for us, but definitely are not those trees you see at National Taiwan University campus, because it's pretty warm on ground, right? So if you want to study this kind of materials in Taiwan, you have to go into deep mountains. And in Taiwan, we used to be famous by our red cedars and cypress. Japanese and Portuguese loves them. They cut lots of them and export. So we don't have much of that right now. But if you want to study past climate change, most importantly, you have to find a live trees, big trees, old trees. Best, it lives for the past several thousand years. That would be the best. And then you drill a little hole through it. And usually, that kind of holes, the size is about like half centimeters in diameter. It doesn't hurt the trees. It can grow back. So you can collect it, but the tree will still live. And in the future, you can do another core if you want. And also, I want to mention is that for those large trees in Taiwan, lots of them are actually exactly the same as the black forest in Germany. So that's why when we try to establish tree ring studies, we have the potential to correlate with tree rings in other regions. So let's go into the details of the tree rings. How do we count? And sorry, this slide is in Mandarin, but I put the translations here. So this is a cross section of the tree ring. The outest part is the bark, and there is a pith in the middle. So here is the Vascular Cambium, which is where the trees begin to grow. It grows foliage from the outside part, and it gradually becomes part of the bark. So supposedly the bark will become thicker and thicker. And it grows in size to produce the wood material, which is what we are going to count. And in early springs, usually the nutrition is more sufficient, so the tree grows faster, the cells grows larger faster, but the cell wall is thinner, which we call it early wood. It's this part, loosened part. And in autumn, in fall, the condition is not so favorable for growing, but this tree still can grow a little bit, but it grows slower, so the cell is smaller, the wall is thicker. We call that late wood, which is these clear rings. So a set of annual growth ring is one layer of early wood plus one layer of late wood. Then you can count. This is 1 year, 2nd year, 3rd year, 4th year. This is how we know the age of the tree. However, some accidents might prohibit the trees from growing to produce some false rings like these. These three rings are true late wood, and these two are probably false ring. We call it false ring just because maybe the tree didn't get enough nutrition, or maybe the winter got too cold, or maybe there was a forest fire, so the tree stopped growing. Whenever it stops or it grows slow, it creates a thicker rings. But of course, I'm not a specialist for tree ring studies, so sometimes for me, the false ring looks so similar to the late wood. But for an experienced scientist, he can tell right away what is the real ring, what is false ring. But this tells you the uncertainties of these studies. Let's imagine if you have a really huge trunk and you have 5 scientists. Each one counts their own annual rings. There might be some uncertainties, plus minus 2 or 3 years, right? Because each person might have different judgments on the false ring and the late wood. So it gives you the range of the uncertainty of this kind of studies. But anyway, this is how they established the chronology of the tree rings. But now we only talk about the chronology, right? And what's the important data? The important data is actually the width between rings, or they call it tree ring density, ring densities. So now these figures, we need to spend some time on this to explain that to you. The figure on top is a cross section of the tree ring core. And the diameters, I just told you, is usually about ½ centimeters. It's just a little core penetrates the trunk. So here is the tree rings. They counted each ring, each set of ring represent 1 year, and then those scientists actually measure the width between those rings and try to scale it. And for tree ring studies, one of the difficulties is before you before you talk about the past, you have to have a basic understanding of current environment. So this is what they drill from a live tree, and they have to have a short survey on local temperature, precipitation, wind strength, or soil nutrition, those parameters for the modern times, and try to correlate the width data to those environmental parameters to find the best match. And in the bottom part is a chart from the studies in Nevada. Let's look at the x-axis. It's a chronology from 6,000 years ago to current time, year 2000. And Y is the Y is the scale for local precipitation, and the horizontal line is the 20th century's average precipitation levels. So in that place, scientists found the width of the tree ring density correlates to local precipitation the best, at least for the past 6,000 years. So if they want to study climate in the long past, they'll just they'll measure the width again for the past, and then they can guess or speculate past precipitation based on this correlation. But this is really not, I should say this is site specific. In Taiwan, the tree ring density may not correlate to precipitation. It may correlate to soil nutrition or wind strength, depending on the location. So the most important thing is you have to have a live trees to start with, to do the calibration first, before you can study the past environment. And this plot, I just want to tell you that for the current tree ring studies, they can extend to the past 12,000 years before present. But actually, there are no such old trees. How do they do that? They actually try to do something like puzzles. Doing the puzzles, they have more than thousands of tree ring segments and try to compile them, try to attach them all together. How do they do that? First, look at A, they need live trees. And B, they try to find some dead trees. And C, we can also find some wood materials in Asian buildings, in the temples or in archaeological sites, just to drill a little hole through the trunks. So let's look at these little bars here. It's ABCD until HIJ. Each one is a little course from certain kind of materials. So the most important one is A, right? It's the live trees. Then you count the tree ring and measure the tree ring densities. It usually has certain patterns for a certain period of time. Then you try to match it. Try to look at the similarities between overlapping segments and compile the whole series of the fossil tree. And this is an extremely labor-intensive work. And I think in Europe, they spend more than 10 or 20 years to compile this. So now we have the tree ring record for the past 12,000 years. But the interesting thing is, after you established this time series, now, let's say if you are an archaeologist, you go to a temple, you want to know the age of the temple. And you can, if you are allowed to drill a little hole through the material, through the wood inside the temple, and measure the tree ring density, try to match with the patterns, then you can kind of determine the age of your temple. And actually, this is how current archaeologists determine the age of the Asian buildings, especially in Asia, because lots of them were made by wood. So now let's switch to another archive, which is the ice cores in the middle, this part. And it is basically just a core drilled through ice. And you can see those scientists wearing heavy snow coats there. Because usually what they do is they drill on site, on top of the Greenland or the Antarctic. And then they need to process there. Because if you bring it back to lower latitude, it melts immediately. and it may not preserve some precious bacteria biologists want to study. So they usually build laboratories in Greenland or Antarctica and send scientists there to study there. And basically, your life is work, only work, and you cannot go out because the weather is harsh outside, and you cannot go anywhere, and you probably have like 8-hour shift of working. So this is also labor-intensive work. And I think they want me to stop to have an intermission, and we'll continue probably after 15 minutes.